2NURFM.com, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
Newcastle and the Hunter Valleys, 2NURFM 103.7, 23 to 10, Tuesday morning as we catch up with the University of Newcastle's Associate Professor in Politics, Dr. Jim Joes, joining us, and a very interesting topic we're having a chat today about, Jim. It's these working visas.
Yes, good morning, Dave.
Overseas so-called skilled labourers to be coming in and doing this work.
Yes, Dave.
457 visa.
They're called 457 visas, and their purpose is to enable skilled labour to be brought in usually for specific projects. There are some categories within that 457 where people gain migrant status, as it were, to come into the country. But quite often the 457 visas are more temporary, so that companies can fill a workers gap, shall we say. They lack some skills, they can't get them in Australia, and they use 457 visas to import the labour to do that. Now, on the surface, and in principle, that seems like a reasonable way around it. The issue as it's unfolding, and has been unfolding for some time, is that in some areas, Australian workers are missing out, shall we say. There is some evidence, and I've had a research student looking into this, and some of the things he's been finding are really quite interesting.
And Jim, could be some suggestion that some large companies are taking advantage of this to be paying those skilled workers from overseas at a lesser rate?
There is some evidence of that. There's certainly evidence that the 457 workers, the people who come in under these visas, are being being exploited in ways that would not be tolerated under Australian law and industrial law. And while the companies would be the first to say, well, we don't breach any of those laws, so to speak, by the time the workers have finished their contract and gone home again, they're not any better off than when they first arrived. And that's partly, Dave, because there are a lot of expenses that they get charged once they get into the country by the company who bring them in. So the actual net gain, it's a bit like the old company town syndrome where people could only shop in the company store, etc., and had to pay company prices. So in that respect, the 457 visas become a problem, particularly when there are plenty of skilled Australian workers who could take the work if either required or given the opportunity. There are also, sad to say, there are also instances where Australian workers have had their contracts not renewed, and then only to find that the job has then gone to a 457 worker on the basis that there were no skills available. Now, the government has taken up this issue, and from a political perspective, as a Labor government, one would expect that this is the sort of thing that they would take up. They've been pretty silent on this for some years, both in and out of government, so it's not like they've had a consistent line on this, and I suspect that one could see this as trying to gain some electoral leverage with working voters to try and build their support back up again. Having said that, it's, shall we say, not before time that they've actually decided to take a line to say, well, we're going to scrutinise these more closely, so that if there are Australian workers who have the skills who can fill these positions, then the companies need to show that they've made every effort to recruit from Australian skill base rather than import it. The opposition, as one would expect, are sort of trying to take the government to task, and they're doing quite a nifty political move by not focusing on what the government is focusing on, which is the companies, the 457 visas themselves, but trying to turn the issue around as an attack on all migrant workers, in particular 457 workers. But I think it's clear from the government statements on the issue that they're actually looking at the way the 457 visas are in fact applied and whether or not Australian workers are missing out. But in political terms, for the opposition to portray the government as attacking migrants, which I think I heard Mr Abbott this morning on the radio talking about people in Western Sydney, and he himself and others are all children of migrants, etc., and how dare the government attack migrant workers, since we're all part of that same category, so to speak. So like I said, it's a nifty political move because it shifts the focus away from what the government is trying to do, and the opposition is trying to redefine the issue in terms of a government attack on migrant workers. But the reality would seem to be that the issue is the category of 457 visas and how that category is applied, and why, or if, there are Australian workers missing out on jobs. Now, some of the evidence that I've seen from some union workers and union officials seems to indicate that indeed Australian workers are missing out in some areas, and it's not before time that the government has actually decided to take this up. Whether they will take it up...
From which countries are these skilled workers being sourced from?
Well, all sorts. The Philippines is a big source country, and the Philippines is one of those countries where skills can be certified very, very quickly, and that remains to be documented more fully. But there are a number of countries that workers in those countries can get, shall we say, certified as qualified to work overseas in a particular area, and then they get to wherever they're going, and then they can be employed under the 457 visa.
Is that visa seen as a bridging visa to permanent residency in Australia, or is it only for the period of time that they're here for the work?
My understanding is it's for the period of time that they're here for work, but it's not beyond possibility that if someone comes in on a 457 visa, they may apply to have a different, shall we say, immigration status and may well stay on. But generally speaking, the 457 visas are to bring in a sort of, shall we say, a cohort of workers for a particular task to fill a particular skill gap. Mm-hmm. When that task is finished, they then normally return home. Not always the case. There may be another skill that they can, or another skill gap that they have to go and fill. But generally speaking, Dave, the 457 visas was seen as a means of addressing the skills gap. Now, there is another line of thought here too that one could pursue, that some of the talk about the lack of skilled labour is more, shall we say, talk than reality. It's difficult to know in particular areas at particular times whether the lack of skills is due to a lack of workers with those skills, or simply to the short time frame within which companies are sometimes having to operate, that they can't get the skills in the time they need, and therefore the quickest way to get them is to import them on a temporary basis. So we see this, the 457 visa is designed to try and help companies bridge a particular problem, but as the government is portraying the issue at the moment, and as some of the research is showing, some companies are perhaps using these as ways of bringing in cheap labour in ways that can, at the expense of Australian workers. So it's important, I think, for us to understand that, yes, there may well be a skills gap somewhere that needs to be filled. Yes, the 457 visas might help that, but the companies have a responsibility, both to the government, I think, and to the Australian people, that they should be trying to source Australian workers in the first instance, because in many areas unemployment is still a major problem. It's around 5% nationally, but that's only the official figure. The real rate of unemployment is often much, much higher, particularly with Australian youth who are struggling to find jobs when they graduate from various levels of education. Many of these skills that allegedly we're short of, like cleaning skills, so forth, I wouldn't have thought we'd need to import cleaners under 457 visas, but I'm told that is happening at various locations. So surely there are Australian workers who would need work and who are quite capable of undertaking cleaning roles.
Most definitely. Thank you for your thoughts on that this
My
morning,
pleasure,
Jim.
Dave.
Joins us every Tuesday morning. We take a look at state and federal politics from the University of Newcastle. Associate Professor in Politics, Dr. Jim Joes.